I worked at a gas station in my small North Carolinian town 10 miles from Charlotte. I was a 39-year-old wife and a mother of 3 daughters. I was a stay-at-home mom, and my daughters were all in school, and at the time, my family really needed a little extra income. The area was predominantly safe. My hours were 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. My duties were being a cashier, of course, stocking products, cleaning, doing nightly audits, and reading every Dean Koontz novel I could get my hands on. All of this by myself, I should add. The company didn't feel a need for a second person on this shift because it was really slow, but on weekends, very hectic. I handled this job like a pro. I really loved seeing my regulars at night and the morning workers getting their coffee and heading to work. I was at this gas station, which was also a bit of a convenience store, for about a year. I did have the run-of-the-mill meth heads who liked their sweets, the homeless looking for freebie cigs or somewhere to charge their phone. I also had the occasional local police officers that would come in at around 12 to 1 a.m. for free coffee and bitch about their shift. On this particular night, I was reading the Dean Koontz novel Intensity. I put the bookmark in because I felt like moving around. I went around the counter to the 5-hour energy shots, and I began to organize and stock. I heard the bell above the door like I had a million times before. I had so many regulars, ranging from pizza delivery guys to EMTs. I was setting the case of 5-hour energy shots down to help this customer when I felt something cold and hard against my right shoulder blade. My first instinct was that this was a cruel prank from a regular. I turned around to say so, when I was then met with a gun pointing at my forehead. It was an African-American guy with a bandana on half of his face. I immediately put my hands up in shock. I looked around and I saw that there were 3 more guys in different colored bandanas with no gun, but looking nervous, and then demanding me to give all the money. I walked around the counter with this guy holding his gun right to my head and telling me, "Hurry up! Give me the money! Open the register!" I said with my hands still in the air and shaking, Yes, of course, here." And I opened up the register for him. The other 4 guys descended on this register, getting all the cash in the register. Suddenly the gunman looked at me, then said, "This register too, bitch." There was a second register that had the bare minimum for the first shift to open up with. I put in my code, and I opened that register as well. They cleaned out that one too. They then saw the safe underneath the first register, and again, the gunman pointed his gun to my temple and also demanded I open the safe. I said in a shaky voice that the safe is on a timer. If you press one button, whether it be for the $10 bills or a roll of quarters, it won't dispense again for a whole 2 minutes. The guys were all on the safe pressing buttons, while in the meantime, I'm praying out loud for God to spare me, because I have a husband and children that need me. I kept frantically saying this prayer, and the guys were all frustrated that the safe wasn't giving them what they wanted. I heard one of the guys saying, "One of you shut that bitch up!" And another said, "Just shoot her already! We already have what we need!" Right at that statement, I could literally feel I was about to lose my bladder and pee all over myself. Even though I was scared out of my mind, I was also mad as hell that this was possibly going to be where I ended up. I held in that pee, and I just watched as they started to steal as many cigarettes, wraps, and Black & Milds as they could. One of the guys then yelled, "We've been here too long. Let's go. Let's get the hell out of here." 3 of them were sprinting out the door, while one was in front of me, all while I was shaking with clenched hands praying. I looked up, and then his bandana fell down. I thought this was it for me, but he then just smiled at me, and he joined his friends. At the very same time, a woman came inside to buy a soda. They yelled at her too, pointing the gun at her to give them her purse. The lady replied back with, "I'm not giving you my purse, motherfucker." and I thought for sure they would get aggressive. Instead, however, they seemed to just be worried about being there too long. They then ran out the door and scattered through the parking lot. I looked at the lady, then the glass door, and I could see her partner's truck sitting outside. I told her to go to her truck while I called the police. I then locked the door as soon as she was in the truck. I picked up the store's landline and I dialed 911. I ran to the stockroom and I locked that door as well. I told the 911 operator of all the details she needed, and after only a couple of minutes, she said it was safe to go to the front door for the officers, and I did just that. I unlocked the door and I immediately removed my name tag and threw it in the trash. I felt like this was finally over and I was obviously quitting. I saw the woman customer that was confronted by the gunman just shaking, and she was rocking back and forth. I put my hand on her shoulder as she also gave her own statement to the police. I gave the officers my statement and I called my manager. She came to the store along with CSI investigators. I had to watch myself on tape at least 3 times with the investigators. At one point, a CSI guy paused the video while the thieves were surrounding the safe and their back was turned. And he asked me, "Ma'am, why didn't you run?" "Because I was afraid I'd be shot in the back," I said. The man apologized immediately, realizing how traumatized I really was. After the police left, I continued to converse with my manager as she tried to console me. She then called her manager because she had never been through anything like this. I actually heard upper management tell her, "Oh, she'll be all right. No need for me to get out of bed for this." I literally lost it, and I told her she was a piece of shit. I eventually went home, and around this time it's 4 a.m. I race upstairs, and I kiss all my children on their foreheads. I then went to mine and my husband's bedroom, and I went into our bathroom to wash my face. I was thinking in my head that I didn't want to wake him up because he has another hour to sleep before shift for his job begins. I couldn't help but to break down after realizing I was alive and that I was now at home splashing water on my face. My husband woke up to this and he asked in a slight panic, "What's wrong, babe? What's going on?" I broke down to my knees on my bathroom floor and I then explained my entire nightmare night to him. He held me and consoled me. I stayed up until it was time to take my children to school. When I got back home, I called the company's HR. They were very cold towards me. I then decided to call a workers' compensation lawyer. After discussing what happened to me on my 3rd shift all by myself, as well as the HR being so cold towards me, he took my case. I discovered that the 4 guys that robbed me at gunpoint were all 16 years old. I don't know what punishment they ever received, but I do know that I got 1 year of unemployment checks, as well as a settlement of $25,000. I also received therapy for the PTSD that I now have. It took about a year for me to be able to go to a gas station all on my own. It's been about 4 years since, and I'm doing okay now. That is, as long as I have my 2 knives and a taser with me. Back in the summer of 2020, I was at home playing video games with a buddy of mine when I realized I didn't have any booze left. Pretty much all I did during the pandemic was drink and play video games. Please don't judge me. Anyway, I decided to drive to the local gas station just a few minutes away from my house. As I walked into the gas station, I had noticed 4 men, 4 very large men. And they were being very loud and obnoxious by the gas pumps. They must have been pretty drunk too, because they were being so rowdy, and 2 of them seemed to be stumbling around their truck. Now, this wasn't an abnormal sight, as my town's full of rednecks who drink way too much. Anyway, I went into the gas station, and I went over to the liquor section, and I had grabbed my choice of beverage. As I was grabbing my drink, the men had come in to pay for their gas, or whatever they were buying. The cashier was a young, attractive girl. She must have also been new because I frequented that gas station a lot, and I had never seen her there before. As the men were paying for their things, they had started to say very sexual things to the girl. I could tell it was making her uncomfortable. I won't repeat them as they're just really not worth saying. But they began asking her what time she got off and which car was hers. I could see that she was starting to shake and she could barely get the change out of the register. I really felt terrible for her, and I then shouted, "Hey, just pay for your things and leave." Now, my mouth had acted before my brain could process that these men had not only outnumbered me, but they were almost twice my size. I'm a male, and I'm about 6 feet tall and decently built, but if these men decided not to play nice with me, I stood no chance at all. After I blurted out for them to leave, they all turned and looked at me. It was then that I realized the situation that I had just put myself in, and my heart dropped into my stomach. By the pure grace of God, they simply shot a pissed-off glance at me, nodded, and then left. I then approached the counter, asking the young girl if she was okay. She was still shaking, but she said yes. I asked her if she wanted me to call the police for her, but she said no, and that her manager was in the back. I just said okay, and I paid for my things. I looked out the window, and luckily the big rusty truck the men came from was now gone. I did a quick jog to my car, making sure they weren't parked around the corner of the building, and they weren't. I was able to make it home to enjoy some drunken video games with my friends. So fellas, if you are ever in the position to stop sexual harassment, do it. Just make sure you aren't possibly going to get your ass kicked in the process.
Lately, I have been rethinking my career choice. I currently work as a location manager in the city where I live. For those people who may not specifically know what I mean when I say location manager, it just means that I'm responsible for finding locations for directors to film and secure locations for film production. I know it may not seem like a glorious job, but this industry is crazy, and I had to secure any job that I could get. I love movies and the entire entertainment industry, and it has always been a dream to work in this field one way or another. Well, as it turns out, I was quite good at being a location manager. Over time, I was able to build up a little bit of credibility, which made it much easier to secure locations. I worked on a bunch of films for the last several years, some bigger than others, but mostly low-budget films. During my time doing this, I met a ton of famous actors and influential people in the industry. At this point, you're probably wondering why I would be rethinking my career choice. Everything seems super cool. The simple answer is, this world of film and entertainment burns you out quicker than anything else. However, that is not the main reason why I've been truly rethinking my career. In actuality, the straw that broke the camel's back is much darker and more sinister. The last movie I worked on was not a great movie, plain and simple. Everybody is entitled to their opinions, of course, but objectively speaking, this was one of those ultra-sappy movies that you find on the Hallmark Channel, and it just felt uninspired. I will say, though, that the crew on this production was amazing. I love the writers and directors and even some of the actors. We ended up getting to know each other and going out on a couple of occasions. The beauty of working on these smaller productions is that you really get to form a bond with a lot of the crew, which is something I imagine doesn't happen on massive Hollywood film sets. One of the extras in the film, who had a handful of lines, started to hang out with me quite a bit. Her name was Hannah, and like a lot of extras, she was, and I believe still is, an inspiring actress. Hannah is someone that I would describe as remarkably beautiful. When she walked into a room, heads would turn, and that's not even an exaggeration. When the director met her, he was so blown away that he gave her a very minor part in the movie. She literally had like 5 lines, but I assume that's sort of a big deal for your first movie. In the several weeks that we worked on the movie, Hannah seemed to take a liking to me, which, at first, I was really into. After Hannah's small part, she stuck around with me and helped me. She basically was an unofficial assistant to me and helped me with day-to-day tasks, and I made sure that I was able to get her paid for her efforts. Like any production, towards the end of shooting, tensions can get a bit high and people can get short with you. However, what happened on our last day of production was something altogether different. Often on film sets, filming can take place overnight, and that was the case for this final day of production. Hannah was on location with me just helping, but she didn't seem like herself. Hannah was always upbeat and excited, but tonight she was in another world. She was quiet, dismissive, and kind of rude for lack of a better word. I'm not sure exactly what time it was, but it was sometime in the middle of the night. We had a small crew of art department guys setting up the location. I was there basically just overseeing everything, and Hannah was there just helping me. The director and the actors for the scene were there, but they were all resting in the back room in the building while we were filming inside. When the art guys finished, they all headed out, and it got to be just myself and Hannah awake in this location. In all the years I've worked on movies, I had never seen such a light crew. You could tell the feelings and vibes of this project just weren't all there. I tried making conversation with Hannah and joking around with her, but all my efforts sort of just failed. She just kept brushing me off, and I honestly didn't really care. I figured once we wrapped the film up, I would never see her again. While I was awkwardly just walking around the set, I heard Hannah shout for me, and it sounded like it was coming from a distance. Seconds ago, she was right next to me, so I found it weird that she was in the next room. I rushed in there to make sure that she was okay, and when I got in there, she was standing in the back of the room with the lights off. I could only barely see her. The only lights were the lights shining into the room from the doorway I was now standing in. "Hannah? Are you alright? What's going on?" I said with genuine concern. She just smiled at me and said in an almost seductive voice, and yet it still sounded off. She said, "Hi, I have something for you." Well, as you may expect, my mind was racing. I had a feeling that maybe this girl had an interest in me, and now she wanted me to join her in this room alone. I slowly approached her because I was still feeling some apprehension about all of this for some reason. When I got about 5 feet away from her, I noticed her hand behind her back. I stopped and asked, "What do you got behind your back? You're not going to stab me, are you?" I laughed, trying to make light of the strange situation. At that moment, Hannah started to cry and sob uncontrollably. I didn't know what I did to upset her. Before I could say anything, she shouted, "I liked you so much, and all you ever cared about was this stupid movie. I hate you." As I tried to take all of that in, she threw a knife from behind her back onto the ground and ran right through me and knocked me off my feet. My heart was beating out of my chest at this point, and when I approached the wall where I was standing, I looked down and it was in fact a knife. A real knife. For some reason, I never reported this to the director or the authorities. I have no idea why. I just figured since nothing happened, I'm better off just leaving it alone. The more time that passes, the more I think about that night. What would have happened if I kept walking toward her? Would she have stabbed me, or was it all just a trick? If it wasn't the middle of the night, would she have even tried anything like this? And perhaps most horrifying, I have no idea where she is or where she went. She's got no social media anymore. I looked and no other film credits, at least that I could find. This industry is crazy, man. You meet a lot of strange people who sometimes just aren't all there. Hannah, for example, is a sweet, beautiful girl, and one night, I don't know if it was the sleep deprivation or all the hours we were working, but she just lost it. I think the highs and lows of this industry have always taken enough toll on me. As I've stated, I assume she's probably still trying to act, probably under another name, but honestly, this poor girl has some inner demons, and it wouldn't surprise me one bit if the demons in her head won. In my mid-20s, I was trying to figure out a lot of aspects of my life, and I was trying to get my future in order. I was never objectively a bad person, but somehow, I always seemed to fall through the cracks. I finished near the bottom of my class with my GPA, never went to college, and experimented with some extracurricular things that you could say are illegal. I was never in trouble, but I also never brought anything of substance to the table. I was about a month away from my 26th birthday when I met Janelle, and that's when I decided it was time to use my brain and become a decent member of society instead of a burnout. Due to my disturbing resume or lack thereof at this point in my life, I was finding it very hard to find a job. Even jobs that you may think anybody can get, I wouldn't even get a call back. Even if I went out of my way to reach back out to them to follow up on applications, I still would never have my call returned. It hit me hard. Just as I was about to give up, like I always did, Janelle found me an amazing job. Not glamorous by any means, but for someone like me, it was amazing. The job was for an overnight warehouse worker. I would work from 9 p.m. until 6:30 a.m. loading up pallets with boxes. Though the main premise sounds simple enough, and it was, physically the job was tough. We never had enough help, and it was extremely hard to keep help once we would get workers in the door. I found myself a lot of time working alone until finally the company downsized. We started to work until 4:30 in the morning instead of 6:30, and the little help that we had was spread thin. When I was working, I would put headphones on and just get into the zone. I didn't bother talking to anybody or even getting to know anyone because chances are I wouldn't be seeing them in a week or two, and honestly, talking just distracted me and I was all about getting my job done. One night when I was nearing the end of my shift, I noticed a small-looking man standing about 5 feet away from me. I didn't say anything at first because I figured it was a new employee just watching how I was doing things. When I finished, I took my headphones and asked the guy if he needed anything, and he responded, "Yeah, man, I hate to ask, but I was wondering if I could get a ride home." I found it weird considering I had no idea who this guy was and didn't even recognize his face as one of the workers. Being the kind of guy that I am, I told him that I would for some gas money. He responded almost nervously and said, Yeah, man, of course. I got you." I told the guy to give me a few minutes to grab my things and punch out of my shift and to meet me outside. He nodded and agreed. I felt weird about the situation, but I've been in his shoes before, I kept telling myself. I told one of the other guys when I was punching out that I had to give the weird new guy a ride home, and the other employees made a strange face and asked, "The new guy? I don't remember seeing a new guy." We both shrugged it off, just assuming that's how this place operates these days. I went outside a few minutes later and saw the strange guy waiting next to my car. What I didn't find alarming then, and I wish I would have, was that I'd never told the guy which car I drove, and yet he was already waiting by my car. We started to drive, and right away things were getting weird. I asked him where he lived, and he gave me some vague and confusing answer. I live on Maple Drive. Well, no, not anymore. I live, near the park. You know, Rose Park by the edge of the city?" I nodded and said, "Okay, man, near the park. Where near the park? I just want to know where I'm dropping you off, dude." The man said nothing for a few seconds and then said, "Just near the park. Head towards the park and I'll tell you where to go." I'm still kind of in awe of my stupidity as I write this. You have to understand at this point in my life I really didn't care about much, and just wanted to get from point A to point B in my day-to-day life. I didn't question really anything. When we got close to the park, the man finally spoke up. "Turn here." I stopped the car for a moment and said to the guy, "Are you sure? This doesn't really look like a street." The man just kept saying, "Yeah," in his shaky voice as he nodded intently. Against my better judgment, I turned down the long, dark path. This was for sure not a road. It was a dirt path and I couldn't see anything. I turned on my high beams and thankfully it was just in time. Obstructing the road in front of me was a massive fallen tree. "Oh, dude. Looks like we're gonna have to go another way or something. I'm not getting by this tree." The man didn't say anything. I looked over at him and he had his hands in his hoodie. While I was looking at him, he said, "Get out of the car now." He kept moving his hands inside his sweatshirt as if though he was trying to grab something he had concealed underneath. When I looked up out of the windshield, I saw 2 more masked men coming from the side of the fallen tree. My heart was racing out of my chest at this point. I didn't know if I was going to get robbed or worse. The man in my car then screamed at the top of his lungs and said, "Get out now!" I slowly started to open my car door and noticed another 2 men behind my car also wearing masks. When my door was open, I started to step out, and I noticed the man in my car start to get out of my vehicle as well. And that's when I made the single most daring decision of my life. As I noticed him clearly outside of the car, I jumped back into the driver's seat and reversed as fast as I could. Thankfully, he never ordered me to shut the car off, so the car was running this entire time. I may have bumped into one of the potential robbers, or maybe it was a big tree branch, I wasn't sure in the heat of the moment. When I got to the end of the dark path and was putting my car into drive so I could peel off, I looked back one last time and I saw all 5 men sprinting directly at my car. They all appeared to be holding something in their hands, but I didn't bother to find out what they were carrying.
I used to work the register at a local gas station, though I've since left as there were a lot of strange things that happened when I would work overnight. But this one situation in particular will stick with me forever. I only worked the night shift a few days a week, usually Friday and Saturday. My shifts were usually boring and honestly just a game of trying to stay awake. The only thing I really had to do was stock the shelves and occasionally help a customer. I would get a lot of drunk people or families on road trips, and sometimes even whole groups of friends. But for the most part, it was pretty quiet. On this night, it was around 2 a.m., and I hadn't had a customer in over an hour, so I was starting to doze off a little bit. The desk was around the corner from the entrance, and there was a bell on the door that rang when somebody walked in, so usually falling asleep wasn't too big of a deal. I woke up after a few minutes, hearing the bell ring, and a few seconds later, saw a customer walk in. He looked like a typical 30-year-old man that would come in for some beer or a snack. He walked around for a little bit, down every aisle, looking at everything. Now, I've worked in retail for a long time, and I know what it looks like when someone is looking for something specific. But this man had nothing in mind. He was just looking at the shelves, browsing the store. During the day, this is pretty normal, but people don't usually come in at 2 a.m. to browse the gas station shelves. I looked out the window to my left to see if he was filling up his car and was maybe just passing the time, but there were no cars outside. A couple minutes went by before he eventually looked over at me and said thanks, and then walked out. I didn't know what to make of that, but I just figured he stole something small and was just being a dick about it. The whole situation left my mind after a few minutes, and I started to get really tired again. This time, I decided to grab my cart of items to stock and start filling up the shelves to pass the time. I'm not really sure how long I was stocking for, maybe 20 minutes, before I saw a man show up at the end of the aisle I was stocking. It made me jump a little, as I never heard the door ring. This guy was wearing a large hoodie and dark clothes. I pretty much knew right away that something was very off. The man continued down to the back of the store, and I immediately went back to behind the counter. I tried not to stare, but I noticed that as he walked down the aisles, he wasn't looking for anything. He was just browsing. It clicked in my head immediately that this was the same guy from just a little bit ago, but he had changed clothes for some reason. I also came to the realization that he probably came initially to scope out the place before doing whatever he planned on doing. I started to panic in my head. The man began to come down the aisle closest to the counter, and I could see something heavy in his front hoodie pocket. I made a split-second decision to try and prevent any further escalation, and I said, "Welcome back, sir. Need help finding anything?" He made eye contact with me, and I could tell he knew exactly what I was trying to do. He approached the counter, not saying a word, and brought his hand out of his pocket, revealing a small handgun. Then he grabbed a small pack of gum from beside the counter and placed it in front of me. He said, "Just this." Confused and in shock as to what was happening, I didn't even react for a few seconds before eventually scanning the gum nervously. Still holding the gun, he took out $1 from his jean pocket and threw it on the counter, then said thanks and walked out. I was in total shock, trying to wrap my head around what just happened. I ended up reporting the situation to the police and calling my manager, who didn't pick up. No updates ever came out of the situation, but it had me on edge for the last few months that I worked there. I'm still unsure of what really happened that night, or what the man's intentions were, but honestly, I'm glad I never found out.